The sound of gunfire echoed across the plains as Thomas Irving rode into Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory, 1885, a man haunted by the demons of his past and the blood that stained his calloused hands. He slumped forward in his saddle, his breath labored as crimson seeped through his shirt, a reminder that some wounds never truly heal. Thomas had been riding for 3 days straight, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the outlaws who'd ambushed him near the Mexican border. He'd killed 2 of them before escaping, adding more souls to the tally that weighed on his conscience. At 32, his reputation as one of the most dangerous gunslingers in the territory had brought him nothing but sorrow and endless pursuit. Redemption Creek appeared before him like a mirage, a dusty collection of wooden buildings shimmering in the unforgiving heat. The town was bigger than he'd expected, with a main street lined with establishments that suggested it had prospered from the nearby silver mines. His vision blurred as he guided his exhausted horse toward what appeared to be a doctor's office. As Thomas dismounted, his legs nearly gave way beneath him. He steadied himself against his horse, a loyal Palomino stallion named Chance, before stumbling toward the door with a hand pressed against his side. "Help!" he managed to rasp before collapsing onto the wooden porch. Olivia O'Malley had been restocking supplies when she heard the thud outside the clinic. At 26, she'd been serving as the town's only nurse for 3 years, assisting the aging Dr. Fleming. Her father, a renowned physician in Boston, had trained her in medicine from a young age, though society's conventions had prevented her from pursuing formal education. When Olivia flung open the door and saw the wounded man sprawled across the porch, her instincts took over. Despite his intimidating appearance, tall frame, unshaven face, and clothes caked with blood and dust, she saw only someone in desperate need of help. "Dr. Fleming," she called out, kneeling beside the stranger. When no response came, she remembered the doctor had left that morning to deliver the Sullivan baby on the outskirts of town. With determined efficiency, Olivia managed to drag the unconscious man inside with the help of a passing storekeeper. They placed him on the examination table, and she immediately began cutting away his shirt to assess the damage. "Madam, you know who that is?" the storekeeper asked nervously, backing toward the door. Olivia shook her head, focused on cleaning the angry bullet wound in the man's side. "That's Thomas Irving, the gunslinger they call Ghost. They say he's killed more men than the cholera." Olivia paused only briefly before continuing her work. "Right now, Mr. Davis. He's just a patient who will die without help. Please fetch some fresh water from the well." Reluctantly, the storekeeper complied, though he departed quickly after delivering the water. Word spread rapidly through Redemption Creek that the notorious Thomas Irving lay wounded at the clinic, and by nightfall, several concerned citizens had gathered outside, including Sheriff Wade Prescott. The sheriff entered the clinic as Olivia was placing a clean bandage over the now stitched wound. "Miss O'Malley," he said, removing his hat, "I understand you've got Thomas Irving here." "I have a patient here, Sheriff," she replied without looking up. "One who needs rest and care." "That man is wanted in 3 territories," Sheriff Prescott said, his hand resting meaningfully on his holster. "Soon as he's well enough to travel, he'll be facing justice." Olivia straightened her back, her green eyes flashing with determination. "Then I suggest you come back in a few days, Sheriff. This man isn't going anywhere tonight unless it's to the undertaker." After a tense moment, the sheriff nodded curtly. "I'll post a deputy outside. Don't let his reputation fool you, Miss O'Malley. Men like Irving don't change their spots." Once alone with her patient, Olivia studied his face. Despite the reputation that preceded him, in unconsciousness, Thomas Irving looked surprisingly vulnerable. His features were strong but marked by lines of hardship and sorrow rather than cruelty. His hands, however, told a different story, calloused and scarred, with traces of blood still embedded around his fingernails despite her attempts to clean them. "What drove you to this life?" she whispered, though she expected no answer. It was nearly dawn when Thomas first stirred. Olivia, who had dozed in a chair beside him, was immediately alert. She watched as his eyes, a striking shade of blue, fluttered open, confusion giving way to wariness. "Don't move," she instructed firmly. "You've lost a lot of blood, and those stitches will tear if you're not careful." Thomas regarded her silently for a long moment. "Why did you help me?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse. "Because you needed it," she answered simply. "Water?" He nodded, and she helped him take a few sips from a cup. "The sheriff's outside," she informed him. "He says you're wanted in 3 territories." A bitter smile touched Thomas's lips. "Just 3? He must be behind on his reading." "Is it true, what they say about you?" "Most likely," Thomas replied, his eyes now avoiding hers. "You should have let me die on that porch, madam. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." "My name is Olivia O'Malley, not madam," she corrected him. "And I don't let people die if I can help it, Mr. Irving, regardless of what trouble they've caused." "Thomas," he said after a moment, "if you're going to patch up a wanted man, might as well use his given name." The next few days established an uneasy routine. Sheriff Prescott visited daily, checking on Thomas's condition while reminding him that a cell awaited once he could stand. Thomas remained mostly silent, answering Olivia's medical questions but offering little else. Yet she noticed how his eyes followed her movements when he thought she wasn't looking. On the 4th day, Dr. Fleming finally returned. The elderly physician examined Thomas's wound with approval. "Fine work, Olivia," he commented. "The stitching is nearly as good as my own." "Better, I'd wager," Thomas said unexpectedly, causing Olivia to look at him in surprise. It was the first time he'd volunteered a comment that wasn't in direct response to a question. Dr. Fleming chuckled. "You might be right, Mr. Irving. My hands aren't as steady as they once were." He turned to Olivia. "The fever's broken, and the wound shows no signs of infection. I believe our patient will survive to face the music, as it were." That night, after Dr. Fleming had retired to his quarters above the clinic, Olivia found Thomas sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the starlit sky. "You should be resting," she admonished, though her tone lacked conviction. "Been resting for days," he replied. "A man can only stare at the ceiling for so long before he starts counting his regrets." Olivia pulled a chair closer to his bedside. "And how many is that?" "Too many to count before sunrise," Thomas said with a hollow laugh. Then, his expression turning serious, he added, "Why are you here, Olivia? A woman with your skills could work in any city." The question caught her off guard. "I came west after my father died. Boston held too many memories, and too many closed doors for a woman who wanted to practice medicine." She hesitated before continuing. "Dr. Fleming was an old friend of my father's. He offered me a position where I could use my knowledge instead of just pouring tea at ladies' socials." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "You're brave, coming to a place like this alone." "And you?" she asked. "What's your story, Thomas Irving? How does a man end up with blood on his hands and a price on his head?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed deeply. "I wasn't always running," he began. "Had a small ranch in Texas, wife named Sarah, a son on the way." The pain in his voice was raw. "Then the Comancheros came. I was in town selling horses by the time I got back." His words trailed off. "I'm sorry," Olivia whispered, instinctively reaching for his hand before catching herself. "I tracked them," Thomas continued. "All 7. It took 2 years, but I found every last one and sent them to hell. By then, killing had become familiar. Too easy. I took work as a bounty hunter, then hired gun. Somewhere along the way, I stopped caring if the men I hunted deserved their fate." The weight of his confession hung in the air between them. "The blood on your hands," Olivia said softly. "Not all of it belongs to guilty men, does it?" Thomas met her gaze unflinchingly, No. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses outside. Many horses. Thomas tensed immediately, his hand instinctively moving to his side where his gun would normally be. Olivia moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. "Riders," she said, her voice tightening with concern. "At least a dozen. Armed." "The Jackson gang," Thomas said grimly. "They must have tracked me here. The two I killed at the border were their kin." He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, grimacing with pain. "I need my gun." "You're in no condition to—" A gunshot cut off her protest as a bullet shattered the window, sending glass spraying across the room. Thomas lunged forward, pulling Olivia to the floor. "Where's Irving?" A voice bellowed from outside. "Send him out, or we burn this place to the ground." Sheriff Prescott's voice answered. "This is a doctor's office with innocent people inside. Stand down." Another shot rang out, followed by the sheriff's cry of pain. Thomas's face hardened. "They won't leave without me," he said, looking at Olivia with sudden resolve. "And they won't leave witnesses." "Your gear is in that cabinet," Olivia said, making a swift decision. "But you can barely stand, let alone fight." "I don't need to stand to shoot," he replied grimly. As Thomas retrieved his gun belt and revolver, Olivia heard Dr. Fleming's voice outside, trying to reason with the gang. She crept to the broken window and saw the elderly doctor standing on the porch, hands raised placatingly toward the mounted men. The sheriff lay wounded on the ground, clutching his shoulder. "Please," Dr. Fleming was saying, "there are patients inside who cannot be moved." The man who appeared to be the leader of the gang, a broad-shouldered figure with a distinctive scar across his face, laughed harshly. "The only patient we care about is Irving. Send him out now, old man." Thomas appeared beside Olivia at the window, his face pale but determined. "That's Elijah Jackson," he whispered. "He won't hesitate to kill everyone in this town if it means getting to me." "Doctor," Jackson called out, "you've got 1 minute before we start shooting." Thomas checked his revolver with practiced efficiency. "I need to get out there before anyone else gets hurt." "That's suicide," Olivia argued. "There are too many of them." "Better me than innocent townspeople," Thomas replied, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected gentleness. "Thank you for trying to save me, Olivia. Some men can't be saved." Before she could respond, the clinic's back door burst open, and 2 armed gang members rushed in. Thomas reacted with startling speed despite his injury, firing twice. Both men fell, but the gunshots alerted the others outside. "They're coming in!" Thomas shouted, pushing Olivia toward a storage closet. "Hide!" "I won't leave you to die," she insisted, grabbing a scalpel from a nearby tray. The front door splintered as more gang members forced their way inside. Thomas positioned himself behind an overturned examination table, his gun trained on the entrance. When the first outlaw appeared, Thomas fired with deadly accuracy. The gunfight that followed was chaotic and brutal. Thomas, despite his weakened state, fought with the skill of a man who had survived countless battles. Olivia, against his orders, remained by his side, loading his spare revolver when his first ran empty. 3 more gang members lay dead before Thomas took a bullet to his shoulder, the impact knocking him backward. As he struggled to raise his gun again, Elijah Jackson himself stepped over the threshold, rifle aimed at Thomas's chest. "This ends now, Irving," Jackson snarled. "An eye for an eye. You took my brothers, I'm taking you." As Jackson's finger tightened on the trigger, Olivia lunged forward with her scalpel, slashing at his gun arm. The rifle discharged into the ceiling as Jackson howled in pain. Thomas seized the moment to fire his last bullet, catching Jackson in the chest. The gang leader staggered backward, disbelief etched on his features before he collapsed to the floor. Outside, hearing their leader fall, the remaining gang members began to retreat, unwilling to continue the fight without Jackson's driving vengeance. In the sudden silence, Olivia rushed to Thomas, who had slumped against the wall, fresh blood staining his bandages. "Stubborn woman," he gasped. "Told you to hide." And let you have all the glory? She retorted, tearing strips from her apron to staunch his new wound. You've already torn your stitches. I'll have to start all over. The corner of Thomas's mouth twitched upward. Worth it to see you wield that scalpel. Remind me never to anger you. The aftermath of the attack transformed Redemption Creek. Sheriff Prescott, nursing his own wound, was forced to acknowledge that Thomas Irving had saved the town from certain bloodshed. When a federal marshal arrived 3 days later to transport Thomas to stand trial, he found himself facing unified opposition from the townspeople, led by Olivia and Dr. Fleming. The man you want took 6 bullets defending this clinic and its patients, Dr. Fleming testified. Whatever his past crimes, he's earned the right to a second chance. The marshal, a pragmatic man named Cooper, reviewed the telegrams confirming the deaths of the notorious Jackson Gang, along with affidavits from witnesses who saw Thomas protect the town rather than flee when he had the chance. There's still the matter of his outstanding warrants, Marshal Cooper said, though his tone suggested room for negotiation. Some of those warrants are for men who deserved justice when the law couldn't provide it, Sheriff Prescott admitted reluctantly. I've sent telegrams to my counterparts in the other territories. 2 have already agreed to review the charges, given the circumstances. The marshal studied Thomas, who stood straight despite his injuries, awaiting judgment without plea or excuse. I'll make you a deal, Irving, Cooper finally said. Stay in Redemption Creek for 1 year under Sheriff Prescott's supervision. No weapons, no trouble. If you can prove you're more than your reputation, I'll personally advocate for your pardons. Thomas looked to Olivia, who had rarely left his side since the attack. Her steady gaze gave him the answer he sought. I accept, Thomas said, extending his hand to the marshal. As spring blossomed into summer, Thomas Irving became a fixture in Redemption Creek. He first worked as a stable hand, his way with horses quickly earning him respect among the local ranchers. When Olivia mentioned that Dr. Fleming needed help with clinic repairs, Thomas volunteered his carpentry skills, gradually restoring the bullet-riddled building to its former state. The townspeople's wariness slowly transformed into acceptance, then appreciation. Children who had once been warned to avoid the dangerous gunslinger now brought him apples for the horses and pestered him for stories. Thomas shared carefully edited tales of his travels, finding unexpected joy in their innocent fascination. Throughout this transformation, Olivia remained his steadfast defender and harshest critic. She pushed him to attend social gatherings when he would have preferred solitude and challenged him when memories threatened to pull him back into darkness. Their friendship deepened through long conversations on the clinic's porch, where Thomas gradually revealed more of his past, and Olivia shared her dreams of someday opening a proper hospital. You could still go back east, Thomas suggested one evening as they watched the sunset. Get the formal education you deserve. Become the doctor you were meant to be. Olivia contemplated the horizon thoughtfully. Perhaps, but there's important work to be done here too. After a pause, she added, besides, I've grown fond of the West. Its possibilities. Its second chances. The way she looked at him then with warmth that went beyond friendship made Thomas's heart stutter in a way it hadn't for years. Yet he held back. Believing his blood-stained past made him unworthy of her affection. In late summer, tragedy struck when a mine collapse trapped a dozen men underground. Dr. Fleming organized a rescue effort, with Thomas volunteering despite the danger. For 2 days, he worked tirelessly alongside the miners, using skills learned in his youth to shore up collapsing tunnels and extract the trapped men. When the last miner was brought to safety, Thomas emerged from the darkness covered in coal dust and exhaustion, only to find Olivia waiting with undisguised worry. You could have been killed, she scolded as she treated his cuts and bruises back at the clinic. Wouldn't be the first time I've faced death, he replied with a tired smile. It would be the first time I cared so deeply about the outcome, Olivia admitted softly. Their eyes met, and Thomas found himself leaning forward, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek. The kiss that followed was tentative at first, then deepened with shared longing. When they finally broke apart, Thomas rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed in bitter-sweet joy. "Olivia," he whispered, "I'm not the man you deserve." "Shouldn't I be the judge of that?" she countered. "I've seen men with clean hands and dirty souls, Thomas. You're working to wash away your past with every good deed. That's the man I care for." Their courtship progressed slowly, conducted under the watchful but increasingly approving eyes of the community. Thomas found work as the town's blacksmith when the previous one retired, the physical labor providing both honest income and a way to exorcise his demons. In autumn, when Dr. Fleming suffered a mild stroke, Olivia took over most of the clinic's responsibilities. Thomas supported her tirelessly, handling administrative tasks and ensuring she ate and rested when cases demanded her attention for days at a time. It was during a particularly difficult week, when a scarlet fever outbreak threatened the town's children, that Thomas truly witnessed Olivia's remarkable strength. For 5 days straight, she moved from bedside to bedside, applying cold compresses, administering medicines, and comforting terrified parents. When the fever finally broke in the last patient, a 7-year-old girl named Emma, Olivia collapsed from exhaustion into Thomas's waiting arms. He carried her home to the small house she'd purchased the previous year, tenderly removing her shoes and tucking her into bed. As he turned to leave, her hand caught his wrist. "Stay," she murmured, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Just hold me." Thomas hesitated only briefly before stretching out beside her, gathering her against his chest. As her breathing deepened into sleep, he marveled at the trust she placed in him, a former killer whose hands had taken so many lives, now cradling the woman who had shown him redemption was possible. "I love you, Olivia O'Malley," he whispered into her hair, finally admitting aloud what his heart had known for months. Her lips curved into a smile against his chest. "About time you realized it," she replied drowsily, surprising him with her wakefulness. "I love you too, Thomas Irving." Winter brought heavy snows and new challenges. The road to the nearest large town became impassable, cutting off supplies. When a pneumonia outbreak threatened the already weakened community, Thomas organized a dangerous expedition over the mountain pass to retrieve essential medicines. The journey nearly cost him his life when a blizzard struck as he was returning with the precious cargo. Lost and freezing, Thomas was forced to shelter in a cave, huddling with his horse for warmth as the storm raged. He thought of Olivia waiting for him, of the life they might build together if he survived, and found strength to continue when the storm finally abated. Thomas staggered into Redemption Creek 3 days overdue, frost-bitten but triumphant with the medicines that would save dozens of lives. Olivia's joy at his return quickly transformed into medical efficiency as she treated his frozen extremities, though her hands trembled with suppressed emotion. "Don't you ever scare me like that again?" she demanded when they were finally alone. "Seems to me," Thomas replied, his voice rough with feeling, "that I should make it official. Give you the right to tell me what to do for the rest of our lives." He reached for her hand. "Marry me, Olivia. Not because I deserve you, but because I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of your love." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Thomas." They married in the spring, exactly 1 year after Thomas had ridden into Redemption Creek more dead than alive. The ceremony took place in the newly built town gazebo, with Dr. Fleming giving away the bride and Sheriff Prescott serving as Thomas's best man, a development that still amazed both men. Marshal Cooper returned for the occasion, bringing news that the last of Thomas's warrants had been officially pardoned in recognition of his service to Redemption Creek and the territories beyond. "Seems you've washed away your past after all, Irving," the marshal commented as he shook Thomas's hand at the reception. Thomas's gaze found Olivia across the room, radiant in her simple white dress. "Not me," he replied honestly. "She did, When everyone else saw blood on my hands, Olivia saw the man beneath it all. Their first year of marriage brought both joy and challenges as they adjusted to shared life. Olivia continued running the clinic, with Thomas dividing his time between blacksmithing and assisting her. They purchased land on the outskirts of town, where Thomas began building a proper house with his own hands, designing a special wing that would serve as Olivia's private practice. In the summer of their second year together, Olivia received an unexpected letter from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, offering her admission based on recommendations from both Dr. Fleming and a prominent physician who had visited Redemption Creek and witnessed her skill. "This is your dream," Thomas said when she showed him the letter, fighting to keep disappointment from his voice. "You should accept." Olivia studied him thoughtfully. "It was my dream." "But dreams change, Thomas." She placed her hand over his. "My place is here, building something lasting with you." "I would go with you," he offered immediately. "Start over in Philadelphia." The love in her eyes deepened. "I know you would. That's why I'm certain about staying. We've both found home here." She hesitated before adding, "Besides, I don't think it would be wise to travel in my condition." Thomas stared at her uncomprehendingly for a moment before understanding dawned. "Condition?" he repeated, his voice barely audible. "You mean—" Olivia nodded, her smile radiant. "Come spring, you'll be a father, Thomas Irving." The news filled Thomas with both overwhelming joy and terror. That night, after Olivia had fallen asleep, he sat on their porch wrestling with memories of the family he had lost and fears for the one he was gaining. The ghosts of his past seemed to hover closer than they had in years. Sheriff Prescott, now a close friend, found him there well after midnight. "Heard the news?" the older man said, settling into the chair beside Thomas. "Congratulations." "I'm afraid, John," Thomas admitted, using the sheriff's given name. "What if I can't protect them? What if my past comes back to haunt them?" Sheriff Prescott was silent for a long moment. "When Sarah and your boy were killed," he finally said, "you became a man consumed by vengeance. You hunted evil men, but the darkness infected you too." He gestured toward the sleeping town. "Look at what you've built here, the man you've become. That darkness doesn't own you anymore." "Because of Olivia," Thomas said softly. "Partly," the sheriff agreed, "but also because you chose to change. Every day you wake up and decide to be better than you were. That's the father your child will know, not the gunslinger, but the man who found his way back to humanity." Those words stayed with Thomas through the coming months as Olivia's pregnancy progressed. He threw himself into completing their house, crafting a nursery filled with furniture made by his own hands. The townspeople, who had once feared him, now regularly stopped by with baby clothes, advice, and offers of help. Olivia continued working at the clinic until her 8th month, when Thomas and Dr. Fleming finally convinced her to reduce her schedule. She channeled her energy instead into training a young woman named Clara as her assistant, passing on the knowledge her father had shared with her. When winter arrived with unexpected ferocity, bringing snowdrifts higher than anyone could remember, Thomas ensured they were well stocked with provisions. He kept the paths between their house, the clinic, and town meticulously cleared, unwilling to take chances with Olivia's safety. It was on the coldest night of January 1887 that Olivia woke Thomas with a hand pressed to her swollen belly. "It's time," she said calmly, though her eyes betrayed her nervousness. Thomas leapt from bed, his heart pounding. "I'll fetch Dr. Fleming." "There's no time," Olivia interrupted, grimacing through a contraction. "This baby is coming quickly. You'll have to help me, Thomas." For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm him. Then he looked into Olivia's eyes, saw her trust in him, and found his resolve. "Tell me what to do," he said, taking her hand. The next hours tested them both. Olivia guided Thomas through the process as best she could between increasingly painful contractions. He followed her instructions with the same focused determination that had once made him a feared gunfighter, now channeled into bringing new life into the world rather than taking it. When their daughter finally arrived with a robust cry just before dawn, Thomas found himself weeping unashamedly as he placed the tiny, perfect child in Olivia's arms. "She's beautiful," he whispered, marveling at the miracle they had created together. "Sarah," Olivia said softly. "I'd like to call her Sarah, after your first wife, a reminder that love endures, even through tragedy." Thomas could only nod, overcome by the generosity of this extraordinary woman who had not only saved his life, but his soul. As the new day's light filled their bedroom, Thomas gazed at his wife and daughter, knowing with absolute certainty that the blood on his hands had finally been washed away completely. In its place was the touch of Olivia's love and the warm weight of his daughter's tiny fingers wrapped around his own. Spring brought new beginnings as Redemption Creek celebrated its founding anniversary with a town festival. Thomas, now serving on the town council, helped organize the event, while Olivia baby Sarah, strapped to her chest, supervised the medical tent. The town had grown considerably in the years since Thomas had first arrived. The railroad had finally extended a spur line to connect Redemption Creek to the main routes, bringing new settlers and prosperity. The silver mines continued to produce, and several businesses had opened, including a proper school where Olivia occasionally gave lectures on basic health care. As Thomas stood watching his wife demonstrate proper bandaging techniques to a group of interested young women, he reflected on how completely his life had transformed. The nightmares that had once plagued him now came rarely. The instinct to reach for his gun at sudden noises had faded. In its place was a profound contentment he had never imagined possible after losing his first family. Dr. Fleming, now retired but still active in community affairs, joined Thomas in his observation. "You know," the elderly physician remarked, "when Olivia first arrived in Redemption Creek, I worried she'd wither here, that her talents would be wasted." He nodded toward where Olivia was now laughing as Sarah grabbed at her demonstration bandage. "I was wrong. She's flourished. And so has this town in no small part thanks to you both." Thomas shook his head modestly. "I just followed her lead." "Perhaps," Dr. Fleming replied with a knowing smile. "But you gave her something she needed too. A partner who believes in her completely." That evening, as Thomas rocked Sarah to sleep in the nursery he had built with his own hands, Olivia entered with a letter. "From the medical college again," she explained, sitting beside him. "They've offered me a position lecturing during their summer session. Just 6 weeks." Thomas studied her expression carefully. "You want to accept?" "I'm considering it," Olivia admitted. "Clara is fully trained now and could manage with Dr. Peterson from Cedar Ridge visiting weekly. You and Sarah could come with me. See the East." She hesitated. "Unless you'd rather not return to civilization." Thomas reached for her hand. "My civilization is wherever you are, Olivia. If this is important to you, we'll make it work." The journey east that summer became an adventure none of them had anticipated. For Thomas, who had spent years avoiding populated areas, the crowded cities were initially overwhelming. Yet with Olivia by his side and Sarah in his arms, he found himself embracing new experiences with surprising enthusiasm. Olivia's lectures at the medical college were received with great interest, her practical experience in frontier medicine offering perspectives the Eastern-trained doctors had never considered. When she demonstrated surgical techniques she had developed under primitive conditions, several prominent physicians requested permission to adopt her methods. "They've asked me to write a manual," she told Thomas one evening in their rented Philadelphia apartment, "and return next summer for a longer teaching position." Thomas, who had spent his days exploring the city with Sarah, discovered he was adapting better than expected to Eastern life. "Would you want that?" he asked. "To split our time between worlds?" Olivia considered the question seriously. Perhaps. Redemption Creek will always be home, it's where we found each other. But there's valuable knowledge to be shared in both directions. She smiled at Sarah, now nearly 18 months old and full of curiosity. And I want our daughter to know there's a wide world of possibilities open to her. They returned to Redemption Creek in late August to find the town had elected Thomas as its new mayor. In his absence, a position he initially tried to decline until Olivia convinced him he was uniquely qualified to guide the growing community. You understand both what this town was and what it can become, she argued. You've lived its worst and helped create its best. The responsibilities of leadership suited Thomas better than anyone, including himself, had expected. His experiences as both outlaw and citizen gave him insight into the complexities of frontier justice. His years on the run had taught him to listen carefully and judge slowly, skills that proved invaluable as Redemption Creek navigated the challenges of growth. 2 years later, as Olivia prepared for her third summer teaching in Philadelphia, she made a discovery that would change their plans. Their second child was on the way. We'll postpone the trip, Thomas immediately suggested when she shared the news. But Olivia had a different proposal. What if we didn't go back to Redemption Creek right away? What if we stayed in Philadelphia until after the baby comes? Thomas was surprised. You want our child born in the city? I want to prove something, Olivia explained, that we truly belong in both worlds now, that the past doesn't determine where we can go or who we can become. They made arrangements accordingly. Sheriff Prescott, now retired, agreed to serve as interim mayor. Clara would continue managing the clinic with Dr. Peterson's support. Their house would be maintained by neighbors grateful for all the Irvings had done for the community. Their son, James Fleming Irving, was born in Philadelphia in November 1889, attended by some of the most prominent physicians in the city, many of whom had become Olivia's colleagues and friends. Thomas, now comfortable in Eastern attire and society, proudly introduced his son to the medical community that had embraced his wife's frontier wisdom. When spring arrived, however, both felt the pull of the West. They returned to Redemption Creek with their expanded family, greeted by a community celebration that highlighted how deeply they had become woven into the town's fabric. As years passed, the Irvings continued their unique arrangement, spending most of the year in Redemption Creek while traveling east for Olivia's teaching appointments. Their children grew up straddling two worlds, riding horses across Western plains and attending Eastern cultural events with equal ease. Thomas, whose hands had once known only how to destroy, learned to create in countless ways. He expanded their home as their family grew, eventually adding a small private hospital wing where Olivia could train other frontier nurses. He served as mayor for 12 years before passing the role to younger hands, though he remained active on the town council well into his 60s. Olivia's manual on frontier medicine became standard reading at several medical colleges, and in 1901, at the age of 42, she finally received formal recognition of her skills with an honorary medical degree. Thomas watched with tears in his eyes as she accepted the certificate, thinking of how far they had both come from that fateful day when he collapsed on her clinic porch. One evening in 1910, as they sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard of what had become one of the largest and most beautiful homes in Redemption Creek, Thomas took Olivia's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Saving a blood-stained gunslinger instead of pursuing your dreams without the complications I brought?" Olivia, her hair now streaked with silver but her eyes still bright with the determination that had first captured his heart, turned to him with a smile. "My dreams were transformed, not abandoned, Thomas. Look around you." She gestured to their home, the thriving town beyond, their grown children and grandchildren. "We built something neither of us could have created alone." Thomas raised her hand to his lips. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved, Olivia." "And you let yourself be saved," she replied. "That was the bravest thing you ever did, braver than any gunfight. You chose to believe you deserved redemption." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, hands intertwined, watching the stars appear over Redemption Creek. Thomas Irving, once feared throughout the territories as a merciless gunslinger, now respected as one of the town's founding fathers, reflected on the extraordinary journey from darkness to light. The blood that had once stained his hands had been washed away by Olivia's love, replaced by the countless lives he had helped rather than harmed, including the generations that would carry forward their legacy of healing and second chances. In Redemption Creek, the story of Thomas and Olivia Irving became legendary not as a tale of a notorious gunman, but as proof that even in the wild, untamed West, love possessed the power to transform the most wounded souls and offer new beginnings to those brave enough to accept them.